welcome to this keynote or track keynote where we're going to be discussing M365 101 and basically getting started with M365. This session is going to be a sort of a deep dive intro to Microsoft Teams and how best to use it, tips and tricks, best practices, and frankly, a lot of landmines to avoid as you start using it or use it more from a day-to-day perspective from all users. So I'm hopeful that you can take some good nuggets away from this session, not just for yourself, but to your colleagues, to your peers, to your friends, your students, whoever you happen to be working with, and kind of use it from there. Quick logistical thing, if you look at the live event that you're in right now, this is Microsoft Teams. If you're not familiar with live events, this is sort of the town hall webinar experience that Teams has built into it. On the top right, you're going to see an option to click something called the Q&A. If you click on that, you have the ability to post a question. I'm going to keep an eye on that during the session today. So if you have questions, feel free to pop in there and type a question, press enter. I will see those questions come in, and every so often I'll pop back over, take a look. If I can answer that, I'll do so verbally if it's quick, or if not, I'll put it in writing so you have it there. But let's just jump right into the session today because content really is king. And before we even get into Teams, I actually want to talk a little bit about the history of, let's just say, online communication. We haven't been doing online communication very long, but from the perspective of like a human lifetime, actually, it has been quite a while. Online messaging really started back in the 1960s through the ARPANET. ARPA is the Advanced Research Projects Agency. Now it's known as DARPA. It's a part of the Department of Defense in the US. And at the time, they had come up with this concept of connecting a bunch of computers, which now we know as the internet. At the time, though, it was really more of a first intranet. It was really connecting a bunch of different universities, some Defense Department agencies, and if you were online at the same time as somebody else, they offered this cute little way to be connected to somebody. So somebody from DC could connect and speak or talk to via text somebody from Stanford. It took a few more years before a guy named Ray Tomlinson, who actually went to RPI, which is a school right across the river from me here, also one of my alma maters, came up with the concept of a mailbox. So going from the concept of synchronous communication, so basically it was like AOL Instant Messenger in the 1960s, to 1971, providing a mailbox so that when you logged on, because there are only so many nodes or computer terminals you could log into, you could look and see if somebody sent you something, respond, and people could answer emails based on when they wanted to. But it wasn't for another 20 years that the consumer aspect of this technology really kind of blew up, and that was when Microsoft offered MS Mail, both to Windows and to the Macintosh users out in the world. And it wasn't actually until for another 6 years, 1997, that Outlook as a brand, which has become so ubiquitous now out there as an email tool, even became known as itself, as Outlook. Prior to that, it was, the services existed, the email, the calendar, the contacts, but it was under a different name. Now, if we fast forward another 20 years, we kind of have seen another paradigm shift. 2016, Microsoft rolls out Microsoft Teams. Now, at that time, they had to make a decision. Slack had rolled out this chat-based sort of communication style, a little bit more informal, a lot quicker, easier to understand, and easier to follow threading conversations. Do we go by Slack? Do we build our own version? And ultimately, they went forward with the building your own version. So this is that next step in that paradigm over the course of when you do the math, is really 50 years now of sort of the concept of email. And that growth has been pretty impressive, even pre-pandemic situation here, starting up in late 2016 to April of this year. They broke 75+ million daily active users. So that means people that actually log on a given day, do something with it, maybe multiple things, but at least one thing, which is kind of a strong metric in my opinion, because if you're really only using it once every week or once every couple weeks, it's not really replacing email or supplementing email all that much. And then of course, COVID-19 happens in March, and we got some additional numbers just last month. They actually broke 115 million daily active users. I'm sure that has a lot to do with the number of schools that have jumped onto Microsoft Teams due to transferring from Zoom or having to go remote after the summer break, that kind of stuff. And if we look at that, though, and compare it to the rest of the system that Teams is built on, so Teams is just one app within the ecosystem of Office 365 or Microsoft 365, depending on the license type you have. Microsoft 365 actually, or Office 365 only has a lot more typical users. Now, this is monthly active usage. They don't report DAU like Teams does. But to try to compare at least some sort of apples to oranges here, we're talking an order of magnitude difference here, the 75 in April to 250 million monthly active users in Office 365. And if we assume, maybe not conservatively, but most of these people probably have an email inbox. That's a lot more people using email still than people that are using Teams. And that gap between the Teams logo that you see here and the Office logo is a huge opportunity to take what is the etiquette and behavioral norms of email, especially the worst ones, and making it so that when people jump into Teams, they're actually doing things that they should be doing, following good rules, following good etiquette, and not just moving forward with the bad behaviors that they've had from email for the last half century. Teams is different enough that if you go in and you start introducing it to people in your organization, or bringing it to them, or even just providing training to them months after they've been first introduced to it, it's different enough that their behavioral aspects or their behavioral expectations with this application are going to be different. And you have the opportunity here to take what you learned that are bad about email, a lot of these examples that you see right here, and try to fix those and inoculate this application so that those people can start fresh and start anew within a new application and a new sort of existence, a new experience, so that they run with what are good best practices, good behaviors, and good etiquette, so that you're seeing a major improvement moving from email to Teams. And I think there are a lot of good reasons to move from email to Teams in general, but I think that there's even additional benefits to get by going from by making sure that you push forward really hard and really reiterate the benefits of having some of these good behavioral aspects. And that's why a little over a year ago, I put together an ebook, free ebook. I partnered with AvePoint, one of the sponsors for this event today, to provide a number of best practices and etiquette tips on how best to use Microsoft Teams. Now, it's not supposed to be a prescriptive resource. It's mainly supposed to be an inspiration, a starting point for you to take some of the ideas and concepts and run with it at your organization. But that's really why we're here today, is to take the opportunity of this new paradigm of communication, collaboration, and a modern workplace, and really run with it with the best practices, etiquette, and behavior that people can kind of benefit from, and not drag along all the crap that has come from the 50 years that email has brought with us. So my name is Matt Wade. I'm coming to you today from upstate New York. I live about 2.5 hours north of New York City, just outside the state capital of Albany. I'm the co-founder of Jump to 365. We are known for our blogs, videos, infographics, number of other services that we provide, and especially the periodic table of Office 365, which is an popular infographic that we put together to try to explain the ecosystem of Office and Microsoft 365. A lot of people know it as a graphic, like you see here, but it's actually a web app as well, where you can go and click on any of these on our website, get a quick introduction to what these apps are, how they work, and you can even customize it yourself if you want to get into the premium style of this. But we're not really here to talk about the whole ecosystem of Office 365. We're just going to talk about Teams for today. So I'm going to start out, as this is an ebook, each of these sections are laid out as chapters, this first one being the prologue. And I want to give a quick intro as to what is Teams. Teams, if you're not familiar with it yet, I think at this point, most people in the Microsoft world are the people that work for organizations that are built on a Microsoft basis of technology, are pretty familiar with it. But if you're not, Teams brings about a lot of different applications or features into one place. A lot of people will say Teams is just like Slack. It's that communication in threaded chat, but it's not just that, because one other person could say Teams is just like Zoom. It's a video conferencing tool, and they would both be right. Because Teams actually, if you want to be kind of pedantic about it, brings together a lot of different services. Now, from the Microsoft perspective, it really is bringing in the features and tools of Skype for Business, chat and meetings, SharePoint and OneDrive, file sharing, Yammer, community building and communities in general, and Outlook for threaded chat and email concepts and groups, distribution groups. If you were to kind of compare that to the outside world and not Microsoft services, Teams is like taking Zoom, Dropbox, Slack, and Skype consumer, let's say, and putting all of these things together into one sort of purple burrito and calling it all one app. And that's really what Teams is, which is why Teams is sometimes really difficult, or more difficult than a lot of other apps, to try to introduce people to try to train on, because it has so much in it. And that's one reason why it's sort of important if you're going to be somebody pushing Teams out to the organization, or if you're going to be a team owner for that matter, to know what happens when you go forward and you create a team. When you create a team, you're going to be creating a Microsoft 365 group in the background. It doesn't really matter that you know that, but do know that it comes with a lot of other things than just the team. You're not just going to get that chat space where you can create channels and whatnot. You also are going to get a designated protected permission space in Microsoft Forms, where you can create surveys and forums and quizzes and things like that within Microsoft Forms that are protected and editable only by that same group of people in the team. You're going to get a space in Microsoft Planner where you can create easy to use project management plans that are based on the Kanban style boards like Trello. You're going to get a SharePoint site, which is made for hosting all of your files. You're going to get an area in Microsoft Stream, which is specifically for hosting videos, especially your meeting recordings, or at least it will in a little bit in the future once Microsoft kind of figures out the future of Microsoft Stream, and a few other areas. There's also connections to Outlook, and you actually can get an inbox and a calendar with your Microsoft team. It's a little bit complex to get there, but it's absolutely doable. If you're not the IT administrator for your organization, talk to that person, and if you are that person, be aware that you can create a team and also have an Outlook group associated with that team. But there's a lot to it, and the whole point here is just to know that there are a lot more, sources of information that can kind of help you out getting there. So when you go forward and you do dive into Teams, know all the features that it comes with, all those tools that you can be using, and don't just use it for meetings. Don't just use it for chat. Use it for a lot of what it has, because once you get into one part of it, there's no reason not to expand into the rest of it, because the rest of it is just as useful for you. Now, if we dive into some of the general tips of what Teams is really useful for, or how to best use Teams, first thing I'm going to say here is to absolutely download the apps, both for your desktop and for your mobile device. One of the best parts of Microsoft Teams for me is the fact that wherever I've worked since Teams has been out, I've never had to have contact lists for anybody that I work with, because I can find anybody I need to on my phone, in my computer. I can make a phone call, really a Teams call, and the Teams calling experience is built right into iOS phone and right into Android phone experience. So it actually lists past phone calls that are Teams calls as part of the phone experience. There's also a number of features in Teams that will not show up in the browser version of Microsoft Teams, which the fact that even a browser version exists is great, but the app, the desktop app, and the let's just say the desktop app. The desktop app will have some more features, especially in meetings, that the browser app will not. Another big thing is notifications. One of the big reasons for me to move to Teams is to clean up your notifications and stop being overwhelmed by all those emails. When you think about it, when you get emails right now, if somebody spams you, or you get an email from some distribution list that you're on from some conference you went to 5 years ago that you keep forgetting to unsubscribe from, Outlook thinks that that email is just as important as an important email that your boss sends you to get something done by the end of the day. The notifications for both are equal, right? Teams, though, gives you the opportunity to play around with your notifications in a very, very nuanced way. So you can get through and you can turn off certain notification types. You can actually stop following certain channels within a team, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. You can also get into the concept of changing how the notifications come up, and there's just a lot of opportunity to really massage the notifications to be what you want them to be. Now, if you get into a list of your channels here, any channel within a team, you can turn off notifications. So let's say you work in like the one shown here, this Contoso Electronics. If you're in the engineering team, you probably don't care so much about the sales team. So you can turn off the channel notifications for that sales team, and you won't be notified unless somebody mentions you specifically calls your name out and presses, makes a message and then presses enter. You'll get that notification. That would not happen in email. If you're a part of this group, this Contoso Electronics group, you would have gotten CC'd on this email the whole time anyway, and those emails would have bombarded you. But here, you take control of basically what your new inbox is, because you can stop people from taking over your inbox, right? Which is a really big deal. Another thing is, if you're in a conversation, you can actually turn off notifications on a conversation in a channel specifically, because maybe you got what you wanted out of it, or maybe you didn't want to be part of it at all. So if somebody mentioned you or the channel or the team at some point earlier in the conversation, you're now going to be seeing updates in your notifications, unless you turn off notifications for that. That feature is just like in Facebook. If I'm sure all of us can probably relate. We make one lone comment on somebody's post, and now everybody's commenting on it, and we get notifications forever. And you can turn off that notification for that post. Same deal. Another really cool one is a feature called Quiet Hours. So Quiet Hours is a mobile-only feature where you can essentially say, I work from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Do not send me a notification outside of that time. You can choose your days, your times. It's really easy to set up, and it's a really great work-life balance sort of setup. If you work a 9 to 5 type of job where you don't need to be hit up after hours, this is a great kind of tool. If you don't work that kind of job, that's perfectly fine. You don't necessarily have to use this feature, but just know that it's there, because it is a really cool one to use. Now, if we dive into conversations, being the chat within a channel and a team, not talking about private chat yet, we're talking about teams at this point. This is one of the big ones for me. I think that conversations are the real win of teams. This is what's really replacing email, the group email thread. So the first thing is, if you are going to go forward and have a conversation, make sure that you @mention somebody to let them know that they're being called out to do something or answer a question. Don't just necessarily type and just hope that somebody sees it and that the ether will answer. They will not. It's similar to being in an emergency situation. They tell you, don't just say somebody call 911 or the emergency phone number. Point to somebody and tell that person to go do that. Same kind of deal here. Try to err on the side of over @mentioning people as opposed to under doing so. All you have to do is type the @ symbol and start typing their name. Their name will pop up. You can select it, press enter, and then you can type your message and then press send, and you're good. One quick tip on this too is that if you have names, especially if they're in the right order, not last name, comma, first name, that doesn't really work so well. But you can do this where you can actually press backspace on Windows or delete on Mac, and you can actually clear out words at the end of their name. So if they're a guest in your account, you can get rid of the word guest. Or if you just want to be informal and just use their first name, you can backspace all the way to their first name. Or in a lot of organizations, they use their organization name or their location or their office name. That information is unnecessary, and you don't need to see that. So you can actually backspace on that so you won't actually see it. But when it comes to @mentioning, try to stick to @mentioning individuals only, unless you absolutely have a need to @mention a team or a channel. @mentioning a team or a channel is becoming more and more akin to spamming. And you can see in this example, this is a real screenshot where there's 900 plus people within a team. And if you were to go forward and @mention the channel for the general channel, those 900 plus people will get a notification. There's almost no example anywhere on earth where 900 people need to get a notification from some random person. If you're in communications, maybe, and you need to send an important announcement, but in real life, not so much. When you do start a conversation, one thing that is not obvious is that you can actually press that little formatting A button in the bottom left of the area, this spot right down here. You do want to do that. Every conversation, absolutely click that, because you're going to get all the features of formatting your text, but the biggest one is going to be subject lines. Subject lines to me are absolutely critical in Microsoft Teams. It is a pet peeve of mine that people don't use them. One, you would never send an email without a subject line, right? Even certain email tools will actually scold you and tell you forgot to put a subject line in, so you need to absolutely do that. But two, as you start having more and more conversations in that channel, as you start scrolling through, it is impossible to find anything if there is not a subject line. The subjects stand out, so absolutely please use a subject line. And this is just kind of standard subject line etiquette. Don't just use quick question as the subject line. Be specific about what you're trying to say with that subject. All right. Just taking a look to see if there's any questions. And so again, if there are any questions, feel free to drop them right into the Q&A area of this session, and I will be happy to answer them as we go through. All right, moving on for conversations. The next thing about conversations is that these are essentially equivalent to email. If you're in a channel and you're having a conversation, a threaded back and forth, they are, I would call them one-to-one. This is an email replacement. It just is internal and it's not happening in Outlook. It's easier to manage, it's easier to read, it's easier to respond to, things are faster. You can like and react to different messages. You can upload and attach files easier. You can open files easier. So that really means whatever your cadence is for responding to an email, that's the kind of cadence that you would use with responding to one of these messages. Again, this is just a proposal, not necessarily a hard and fast rule out there. But I would generally say, do not expect me to get back to you in an hour if you had sent this via email, and I would have gotten back to you in 2 days, which I think is just kind of a fair thing to put out there. Another thing is, I mentioned reactions just now. Each comment has the ability to give a thumbs up or another reaction. Well, the thumbs up was the first one to be given to us. And that one has kind of turned into everybody will just thumbs up something because they think it's a sentimental thing. This is not meant to be a reaction like when you're on Facebook and your friend is posting photos of their new baby. This is not a sentimental action. Use this as an acknowledgement tool. One other major downside to email is the reply all, where people say, got it, thanks, okay, see you soon, all of that kind of stuff, which is useful or I don't know, a necessary evil where you do kind of have to acknowledge things in the email, but like if there's 15 people on that reply all 15 people now have to get that response because otherwise you don't know. This is such a great way to avoid that, because if somebody goes and just thumbs up something, you now have that acknowledgement that they've seen that message or that they acknowledged the content of that message, which is fantastic because now you don't have to be bombarded with notifications about the person responding with got it or okay, which means they don't even have to respond to that message. They can just thumbs up it, because if they respond, people that have been mentioned in the message or in the conversation will get a notification. If they thumbs up it, only the person that wrote that message will get that notification. So it's another way to lower the number of notifications, but you can still, as a person that's involved in the conversation, go back and look at who has done what and who has acknowledged it, because you can just click on the value of the reactions and you can see who has reacted. That being said, if you jump into the rest of the reactions, sure. Those ones can be for sentiment. They were provided a lot later than the thumbs up, and actually they are one for one exactly what Facebook has, so there should be zero issue as to people understanding what they're for or why you might want to use them. You might get some complaints from Slack users who are used to having all of the emoji available to them and not being able to party pair it, but I don't really buy that. The 6 are good enough, well, except for the 1. I do want the 1. I want an eye roll. That's the one thing that I do really want that we haven't gotten yet. Now, bringing this on a little bit further into conversations. Conversations can be great for using memes and GIFs if you want to, but just watch out and be a little bit careful to try to match your culture internally. Be appropriate. Don't be overzealous with how you use those. And when you're using your channels can have guests, which means external people. They can be added for free, which is great for having a partner, a customer. If you're in a school, another school, people can join. They don't have to have Office 365 accounts. They could have a Gmail account and they can just come in and be there and be part of the conversation, share files, do all the same stuff that any other regular member can. And it's really, really great. Just be aware that everybody in your team should know if there are guests, because they need to be able to act accordingly. Now, when you add guests, if you're like a team owner or something, a really great way to clean up the names, because the names usually come through really, really ugly. There's a little pencil next to the name as you're adding them. And as far as I know, this is the only time you can do this. Take this opportunity to press that little pencil, rename that person. You can't get rid of the word guest. That has to be there, but you can at least reformat what their name looks like, and it can be a lot prettier. And one of the perfect or greatest, hidden little features in Teams for me is the ability to forward an email to Teams. So instead of saying, hey, we got this email from on an RFP, here's the proposal that we got. I copied and pasted the content from the email and I uploaded all the files in. You don't have to do that. If you grab the email address of the channel and you forward the email to the channel, that email will get uploaded to the channel, and any attachments in the email will also get uploaded to the channel in a folder called email messages. It's fantastic. So great, because now you can have a conversation about the email internally. So you get this email, maybe it was sent to 20 people for like an RFP, big project group, whatever. Nobody respond to the email. Just forward it to the channel. have the conversation internally, and when you're done, one representative go back out to the original email, maybe 5 weeks later, who knows, reply all, hey, proposer, we really appreciate it. Here's our version with the comments. Please deal with those, get back to us ASAP. Amazing little tool. Coming soon is a different version of that, which will be built right into Outlook, where you can just click share to Teams, and you'll actually be able to just forward it directly and choose the channel right in Teams. The benefit to this version is actually that you can send it to a person in Teams as well. It can go into a private chat, not just into a channel. The upside to the other version is that you can actually edit the email message ahead of time. In this case, it goes verbatim as the way it was created. In the other way, you could actually change the text that you received and all that kind of stuff. So it's actually really cool. Very nice little feature. And it's a session unto itself. But if you are a team owner or you're overseeing people who are team owners, make sure that they are good team owners. Stay up to date on adding and removing members from the team. Add a unique photo or graphic for the team profile. Consider the settings, whether you allow private chat or private channels, whether people can comment in the or create messages in the general channel, whether moderation is necessary, things like that. Now, if we look at channels from the general standpoint here, when you create a channel, make sure you give it a good name. And if you want to change a name later on, make sure everybody knows that you're changing that name, because there is no notification or no obvious notification to people that the name changes. Also, when you change the name of the channel, it doesn't change the name of the folder associated with where the files live. And you can't actually change it later. If you do, you break the connection to where the files live. That doesn't make sense. That's fine. You might want to look into it a little bit later, but just know that a name change to a channel has ramifications, and you want to be aware of what those are. But another nice thing is people really seem to like the idea of putting emoji into channel names. It gives it a little bit of a brand, or a little bit more of an easier way to identify which channel is which. So definitely check that out. But one of my big things about channels is you probably don't need as many as you think you do. A very long list of channels gets quickly overwhelming, especially when you start adding a number of teams to that. All of those teams get very long. It's hard to manage, even if you do use the pinning of channels to the top of your teams list, which is a nice little tip. But don't add a team or a channel unless you absolutely feel you need to. Another thing is memes and GIFs. I mentioned the culture aspect before. Be careful using these because they take up a lot of space in a conversation, and immediately after one person breaks the seal of using a meme or GIF, other people will respond. And those things take up this much space, and something useful in text might be this much space. So if you have a meme and a GIF war going on, you might end up with 15 images and one line of good useful text. Now that's sandwiched and lost in between all of those images. So I generally recommend try to keep one channel just for fun stuff. Call it the water cooler or something like that. It's very easy to keep kind of things separated there, and just slap wrists as necessary. And it really helps out. It definitely makes a big difference. And then the general channel is a channel that you can't change. You can't get rid of. You can't change the name of it. So you might as well use it. Use it for central announcements, big picture stuff, maybe miscellaneous type of concept. It's also really good for using this sort of newer post type called announcement. An announcement is one where you actually get a much bigger banner at the top, much bigger text, and you actually put an image background on it like you're seeing right here. So this is useful because you can use this channel, the general channel, let's say, as a nice central place to get announcements without putting it out there in other places. But I do want to say the big takeaway here for channels is really you should only create channels when you absolutely need them. It should be a strategic decision. This should not be like the old days of shared drives where you just create a folder and a folder and a folder and a folder because you need it right now. Don't do that. Make a strategic decision, because the more channels that you have, the harder it is to deal with. And it just needs to be a team, basically a team decision, especially if the team is reasonably small, like let's say 10 to 50 people. Like those people should all have a say into how the organization works. Now, one major change that happened last year, I think at this point, in 2019, I think, was private channels. These are permission protected within the team, which by itself is permission protected, is a space here where people can gather and feel safe having conversations that other people in the team can access. But they are very complex. It is a request that I don't think people realize what they were asking for. They kept saying Slack does it, and actually that was factually wrong. Slack doesn't have the concept of private channels. Slack just has the concept of channels, and a Slack channel is equivalent to a Microsoft team. There is no concept of a team channel in Slack. So that was one thing that I think people didn't realize, but people really wanted to have these private channels in Microsoft Teams. So these are complex. When you create a private channel, every member of that private channel has to already be a member of the team. You cannot have people from outside of the team in the private channel. That's rule number one. Rule number two, not all of the owners of the private channel need to be a team owner. So the team owners, let's say there's 3 owners of that team, all 3 of them may not be owners of the private channel, which can become difficult because a lot of times the people that need to be or want to be owners of the private channel are not as technically astute. Let's say, a couple more IT savvy folks in the, engineering team are in charge of the engineering team, the Microsoft team. But they want to have the managers in those teams want to have a separate manager private channel. Well, a lot of times those managers aren't necessarily the best trained on the IT aspect, but they know they need to have the secret space, so just give it to me, right? Those people are more likely to have issues because they aren't necessarily well trained and might not be the ones to spend the time to take the training or be more dedicated to it. And the team owners, those 3 tech savvy folks from the engineering team, have no control over the private channel. They can see the name of the private channel. They can see the description of the private channel. They can see, I don't remember if they can see the membership of it or not, but they cannot see anything else. They can't see the conversations. They can't see the files. And that brings me to files. You can't have just a separate document library in the SharePoint site behind the team that's just for the private channel, because the team owners are also the owners of the SharePoint site. So Teams has to make a separate SharePoint site specifically for that channel, and the owners of the private channel are owners of that SharePoint site. So there's a lot to this. If you want to get into private channels, please do your research. Please be aware of what decision you're making. It's very difficult to kind of come back from, especially if the people that are doing it are not that savvy and don't really seem to want to put the effort into it, but they want that security. They might be better off just making a separate team. It's a lot easier to deal with it that way. Okay, so that brings us to files. One of the great things about Teams is the fact that Teams has a built-in file repository. All those files live in SharePoint in the background when you're dealing with a team in Microsoft Teams. There's a little bit of OneDrive in there. I'll talk about a little bit later. But the nice thing is you can edit your files directly in Teams if they're Office files. You can drag and drop files right into the channels where you need them, and you can reference them in conversations. So that's really the big thing for me. In the past, I've worked a lot on the adoption of stop attaching files to emails. Please send links to files so that we all work with the same single source of truth. Well, Teams offers that because we have this one central place where you can upload files. Just go to the Files tab in your channel, upload a file, create a new file there, create folder structures, whatever you want to do. And then in a conversation, make your message, and then you can click the little paperclip attach button, and you can share a link to any of the files that are there, in multiple ones if you want to, and say, hey, don't forget to fill out your timesheet this week, and link to the file that is the timesheet, let's say Excel file, whatever, and click share a link, and then send that message. And now everybody knows exactly what file you're talking about. There can be absolutely no confusion about which one they should be opening up. And there's no concept of attaching to an email where there might be different versions, because you're always talking about the same file. Every time you open it, it is the most up-to-date version of that file. And each of these files has a version history that has up to several hundred versions that goes back to when people made edits. So if you have an issue and you want to restore back to an older version, you absolutely can do that, and you don't even have to talk to IT to do so. And these days, files can get absolutely huge. The OneDrive files can definitely be the 100 gigabytes. I actually can't remember now if the Teams files are 15 gigs or if they're 100 gigs. If they're not 100 gigs yet, they will be soon. So be prepared for that. This is great for people that work on multimedia or maybe huge CAD files, things like that, but something to keep in mind. But one little tip I will give here is in Teams, you can create folders and subfolders. Limit yourself. If you remember the days of shared drives, those shared drive folder structures were basically proprietary knowledge. That amount of those things were essentially like Rand McNally maps that once you knew them in your head, that was the kind of thing that it took you 6 months to get used to. Don't do that to people. Try to limit yourself to 3 levels of folder deep. And there's actually 2 reasons for that. One is the sanity aspect that I just referenced, but 2, there's a limit to the number of characters that you can have in a URL. and eventually you're going to hit it. And once you hit it, when you try to share the file, the link is going to break. The file itself is not going to break. It's going to be fine as long as you browse to it and click, 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 click through the folders to get there. However, if you limit it to 3, there's not that much clicking to do. You're not going to get too lost, and there's almost no chance that you're going to hit the URL character limit because you can't have a folder name too long, and if you multiply that by 3 and then add on whatever your file name is, it's probably not going to be very long. But try to stick to 3 because it's only going to cause you problems if you don't. Take my word for it. But one really cool thing here is the fact that you can sync your files from Teams to your devices. That could be your mobile device, that can be your desktop computer, laptop, iPad, Surface, whatever you want, using the OneDrive for Business sync tool. For a lot of Windows devices, OneDrive is already built in. For Mac, for iOS, for an Android device, just install the OneDrive app, and you can choose which files you want to have sync. They can still show all of them, and you can see them in Windows Explorer, Mac OS Finder, or in the app on iOS or Android, and choose to have certain ones always be on the device, which is amazing because let's say when things go back to normal or go back in time when things were normal, you might be at a conference or at a, let's say at a meeting at a customer. You get into their office and you want to access the agenda and the slides for the meeting that you're attending. You can't get on their Wi-Fi and you don't want to be a pain in the butt during the meeting to try to get onto their Wi-Fi. So how do you do that? Well, their cell service is also really bad in that room. This is not unreal situations to kind of talk about. Had you set up those files to always be available on your device, you would have them available. And if you had made changes the next time you connected to the internet, they would have uploaded those changes, which would have been always really, really great. And that's what this kind of feature is really good for. And if you happen to know SharePoint well, you can always get to the files through SharePoint and have all the SharePoint goodness that's there, including you can have folders and file level permission if you want. I don't recommend it because it makes things more complex. The whole point of Teams is trying to make everybody be equal and have all the same access. So keep that in mind. Next up is private chat. We talked about Teams. Now let's talk about the chat. Chat is a bit of a crutch because it keeps people away from Teams a lot of times, especially in a lot of the customers that I've worked with. Chat is really meant for ad hoc conversations. Try to use it for high priority questions or just to ping people. The urgency of this is really the same as the urgency of like a text message or sending somebody a message in Skype for Business. Keep them ad hoc, keep them not work related. Anything related to work should probably be in a team someplace, which is another reason why I would always tell people to try to keep the membership count low. As you add more people, it's probably work related. The membership matters. In fact, you can have 2 different chats with the same people in that chat. So be careful about that as you create new chats. It doesn't necessarily work the same way that you might think of like your text messaging app works as you go through and play with the membership. You can always add people to it, and in fact, they can be given access to previous chats, and you can choose the number of days of chats worth that they can see. So if you need to bring John into the chat and you were bad-mouthing him 4 days ago, make sure to only let him in for the last 3 days. One thing to be very sure of and very aware of with chat is that when you upload files, those files are going to be uploaded to the uploader's OneDrive for Business, not SharePoint. So what happens here is when you go forward and you share a file into a conversation, it's going to, or sorry, into a private chat, you can select the permissions for this, press enter, and it'll send. That file is now going to end up in the person who sent it into their OneDrive in a folder called Microsoft Teams chat files. This is why I don't recommend using chat for doing work, because as people start sharing files, the files are going to be strewn around all the different OneDrives of the people that are in that chat. And when people leave the organization or they leave the chat, the files are no longer accessible. So if you're using a file and actually like doing work with it, once somebody leaves the organization, their files are gone 30 days later. Poof, gone. You can't do anything with those files any longer. So that's really important to keep in mind, and that's why I always recommend that you should actually go forward with using Teams instead. Okay, so let's see some questions here. Okay, so there's a couple questions here that date back to earlier in the session because there were none, and now there are a whole bunch. Let's see. Somebody pointed out you can also rename guests later in AAD, and I mentioned the fact that you only have the one opportunity to rename the guest, and that's when you add them at the very beginning. You can, of course, rename them later if you're the IT administrator. That reference that I was making was about the general user. That person does not have the ability to change it afterwards. They'd have to put in a request from somebody else. Shouldn't you use the new Send to Teams feature in Outlook? And hopefully I answered that question. There are two different ways to do that, and they have their pros and cons. You want to look at the both of them. I actually like the send email because then I can actually, if somebody sent a very long email, I can actually just whittle it down to the important part and still send the other stuff. And let's see. Okay, I think I'm caught up on that one. All right, and to finish the section here on private chat, this is one where you'll actually pay a lot more attention to somebody's availability status because you want to know whether or not somebody's there when you actually send them a message. And keep in mind what these little statuses are. When you see their picture, there's a little colorful icon, tells you whether or not they're there. The one that's actually most important to me is the one on the bottom right, available, out of office. Looks a lot like available. And the reason that this would ever happen would be you would be out of office. So let's say you put your out of office on in Outlook, and quick tip, don't say thank you for your email, say thank you for your message, because the out of office in your Outlook now shows up in Teams. But if you ever check Teams while your status is out of office on your mobile device, it will show you as available, but out of office. But that little icon does not make it obvious. So if you're going in and trying to check in on things and trying to be sneaky, you're not going to be very sneaky. People will see green, and if people look just for the green and that's all they care about, you might start getting pinged. So just be careful there. And the last one here, just to be, I don't know, not to be scary or negative here, but just don't assume that you have privacy. This is like any other IT system that your organization has. You don't have privacy. The system is not yours. You are just a guest there. And just remember that. Don't say things or do things that you don't want to see publicly ever released. It's, something to always keep in mind. Okay, so we'll finish up here with meetings and calls. This is the one that I think a lot of us are probably the most dealing with over the last number of months, which is all the online meetings, since so many of us are now working from home. The first thing is in the chat in your meeting, make sure to call out individuals with @mentions because you can actually keep track of that kind of stuff when you need to. When scheduling a meeting, you can make it a meeting in a channel. So just select the channel in the meeting scheduler, and that's a nice quick little way to make it apparent to everybody in the channel that there's a meeting coming up. Just be careful because it does not invite anybody from the channel unless you're in an education tenant. Because it's really meant to be like a visibility thing, not an invitation thing. So you're just kind of broadcasting it, not pulling people in. If you want to invite people, invite them first and then add the channel. When you join your meeting, you can replace your background. Definitely a good thing if your background is not great, although at this point, if you work from home and you have been for a while, put a little bit of effort maybe into getting a spot that makes sense. I have worked from home for the last couple of years now, which is why this background is behind me. It's one of the better spots in my apartment. I have good lighting from my natural window over here, though I do have a little bit of ring light here to help me if I need to. So you can replace your background if you need to, but at the same time, replace your actual background. These backgrounds are virtual and they look obvious when you move. If you're like me and you talk with your hands, you can tell my background is real because when I do this, it doesn't get all blurry and weird in the background. You can continue the conversation in text via the chat if you need to, especially if the meeting is large and you don't want to jump in. Always, always, always use video if the internet connection supports it and if the culture, or if not the culture. I actually want to push against the cultures that say don't use video if the circumstances of the meeting make sense. If you're joining a meeting and it's 75 people, you probably don't need your video on, but turn it on for the first 5 minutes, then turn it off. Video is really important because we're a very social species, and if you're working from home for the first time ever due to COVID, keep in mind that humans communicate not just by verbal cues, but also by facial cues and by body language cues. And when you lose the body language and the facial cues, you lose a much larger portion than if you were just to lose the oral cues. So video is a really important aspect, and I think it's unfortunately it's people just default to having it turned off and, oh, what's the difference? It's just like a a conference call from 1991. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but in 1991 we didn't have the technology to do this. So what excuse is there? There's not one, as far as I'm concerned, and I'll beat that horse further dead if I have to. That being said, push forward on staying on mute if you're not talking. And I know a lot of people will get into arguments with me on this one. If you're in a small meeting of 5, 6, 7 people, okay, that's fine. Keep things open. But if you're in a larger meeting, it's really hard to figure out sometimes who is sending through really bad background noise. And literally the only person that doesn't know that there's bad background noise going through is the person sending it. So if you stay on mute, you would ensure that bad background noise isn't coming through. Now I realize Teams is going to come through with that new feature to kind of clear that stuff out, but that's not going to work all the time. I have a cat who has an upper respiratory issue, so he sneezes like constantly. And it's nice to know that I can turn mute on to know that when he goes into one of his little sneezing fits, people aren't going to hear that. And I don't think the Teams sound AI is going to catch that and note that, oh geez, the cat sneezes at least, 10 times once every hour, so we're going to catch that. I don't think it's going to be like that. So that, or your kid running into the office or whatever else, it's not going to be as smart as I think the people think it is. So be careful. The other thing is going to be sharing content. Literally keep people on the same page. Even if you use co-authoring or the ability to simultaneously edit files with other people in your meeting, still, if you're leading the meeting, bring it up so everybody can see where you are at all times so that they can kind of have context. PowerPoint is another big thing. I'm currently sharing a PowerPoint slideshow, but I don't use the PowerPoint built-in sharer. I actually really dislike it. It's not very feature rich. All of the animations and transitions look like they're from 1993 because they're just so poor because you're using PowerPoint Online. There are other features in PowerPoint Online that are still not there yet. And it also keeps me from being able to do some other kind of more cooler tricks for the time being, at least until the new feature they showed where you can put your cutout in front of a PowerPoint slide. Until then, I like being able to take a webcam app and place that next to the content that I'm showing. So I'm not doing it here, but in a regular meeting, I generally do that. So you can see where I'm showing, a whiteboard next to my camera, and I'm basically putting this on my screen and sharing my screen. And I turn my camera off in Teams itself, which is really, really handy. And you can get that information on how to do that pretty easily. Another big thing is if you're sharing your screen, make sure your text is large. My slides, when I make them, I make sure that my text is huge. If you think it's big enough, make it bigger by 2 more sizes if you can. But if you're showing a web page, especially, if you think that that's big enough, it's probably not. Zoom in. These are the controls for doing that. If you're on the receiving end, you can zoom in as well. It's actually very, very cool. I didn't realize this until a couple months ago. You can zoom in on the person's content that's sharing. It's very, very handy. So if they're not zooming in enough for you, you can zoom in more for them. Just use your press the control button or the command button if you're using Mac, and use your mouse scrolly ball or 2-finger scroll on your receiving end if you're on as an attendee. Okay, so that brings me to the end here. The whole point of this session is really to kind of, again, show that opportunity from, remember at the very beginning, I talked about how, I'm going to say few, but there's still a lot of users there are of Teams and how many more people there are using Outlook and email, and how that gap is such an opportunity to take those people as they start working their way towards Teams, because Teams is going to start taking a major bite out of Outlook's apple and say, hey, there are behaviors and etiquette and poor etiquette that we've taken and kind of gotten used to in Outlook that we kind of chuckle about that really just isn't acceptable in Teams. And it's now the time to work forward and actually start using this new paradigm and kind of bring us to maybe not a nirvana, but something close to it where the new experience is different enough that the change is wide enough that the new users of this are going to say, okay, tell me how to use this, not, okay, I'm going to take what I know from Outlook and bring it here, because I do think that there's a major benefit here to bringing us to that. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for having me today. I hope you look forward to the rest of the day and all the sessions that are happening. I know there's SharePoint later tonight or collab talk that Christian Buckley is doing. A lot of great sessions, especially on Teams. I'm very much a Teams guy. So if you're looking for more Teams technical aspects, absolutely take a look at the schedule because there's a bunch out there. I mentioned earlier the ebook that goes along with this. Add this as a tab to a team. It can be a really great compact or a starting point for people to have an agreement on this is the kind of stuff that we're going to agree to at first. If we don't follow this, we're going to slap each other's wrists. And if the content that you have or that I've provided here isn't exactly what you want, or you realize that some of them don't match your culture, just take the content that I have and make a version for yourself and kind of go for it from there. And the probably most important slide of any session that I ever give is going to be the resources, so I'll keep this up for a moment. You can get my slides today at the first link, the one with the star there. You can download the slides, use them for yourself, bring them into your organization, tweak them, use them however you'd like. If you like this content, I actually have a book coming out in the next couple of months. It's going to be very screenshot heavy, kind of a field guide to Microsoft Teams. You can pre-order it now on Amazon and a couple other retailers online. And I have a number of other very cool resources here, including that fifth one down, the Teams video training. It's an 18-minute intro to how to use Microsoft Teams. I'm going to say it's the basics, but it really gets into like the best practices for how to use that. And a lot of other features that we have here. So while I leave this up, I'm going to take a look at the questions and we'll see what else we have here. Oh, okay, good comment. So because of phishing, that is why I've pushed people to Teams, since ours is only internal. And that's great. And I don't even think phishing is an issue for if you include external people, right? Like you can pull external people in as long as they're trusted, individuals, your customer, your vendor, whatever. That's really, really great. And yes, people have been having a lot of issues with presence. That's been an issue since the day Teams came out. That keeps coming up as an opportunity for improvement for the Teams group. That being said, I have seen good. It's good. I'll say it's good enough for me. If somebody's not there and I ping them and they don't get back to me immediately, so be it. But if they're out of office, I've never had an issue where it says they're not out of office or something like that. All right. And let's see if we have any others here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to jump back into PowerPoint real quick. And the next thing I want to say, very huge thanks to the sponsors. Veeam, actually, that commercial at the beginning was pretty clever. I like that a lot. And to the track sponsors. The track sponsor for this track is AvePoint, and I have to say special thanks to them as well. They have been just a great team to work with. I don't work for them, but I partner with them on a lot of things, including this ebook. In fact, the slides, they just have such a great graphics department. They help me out a lot with making my slides a lot better or look a lot better. I provide the content, they provide the polish. It's just an amazing group. And they do a lot of really great work for anybody looking for, backup, recovery, provisioning, governance, all that kind of stuff. They do a lot of really, really good stuff. And then for everybody who saw at the very beginning, the intro for the Children First Fund in Chicago, really great video intro before Heather's kickoff there too. If you want to do a direct donation, you can just open up your phone app right now, open up the camera. Doesn't matter if it's iOS or Android, just hold it right up. Open up either of those QR codes. The one on the bottom is for a 50-50 raffle, $20 per piece. And then the top one is just a direct donation. It's really great to see this kind of outcome or, support coming from a local organization like this. So last bit being here is any final questions I'll let you pull up. I do ask very respectfully, but you should, is to fill out a feedback form. So again, pull up your phone, open up the camera app, hold it up to this QR code and fill out the feedback form for this session. Let them know what you liked, whether or not they should invite me back next year. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, what aspects of this was too much or not enough. Helps me do better in the future, helps them organize a better event in the future. And of course, you can get in contact with me at all of those different places. You can get the handout, the slides, direct download, PPTX. It's not a PDF. I'm not trying to withhold anything from you. You can get it right now if you want to directly from there. And let me go back to Teams real quick and see if there's anything else. Andrea, yes, your questions are being seen. Was there one that I missed? And now would be the time, if you have any final questions, go ahead and post them here. Okay, yeah, so Andrea, you posted it a little earlier. So I hope Matt goes into the MS Teams weeds as I have confusion about how to turn off the endless bubbles on the screen, why some MS Teams has chat, some does not. Why can I not add a picture to my persona to close camera like Zoom? And thank you if anyone is reading and forwarding. So there's a lot in that question. The first one being the endless bubbles on the screen. So I think those would be the notifications, and I would like you to go back to the notification slide and really pay attention if you click your face in the top right corner of Teams and you click on settings and then notifications, you can clean out a lot of those if you don't like what you're getting. Why you're not able to add a picture to your persona to close camera like Zoom, that would be your picture in the top right, or it might be your initials. If you click on that, there's an option to change picture. Your administrator may have turned that off, I guess, but if you click on that, let me just bring this over. This right up here. If you click on this and then click the change picture, that should be where you can upload it. Now this account is one I'm using just for today, so I haven't actually done that. And then the notifications are in the settings area right here. So I would just kind of take a look at that. And Zoom, Teams doesn't have a way to edit that picture during the meeting like Zoom does. I know you can kind of do it on the fly. Actually, my girlfriend has been using my Zoom. She's a bit of a technophobe. So I come up sometimes as Courtney with her picture, and then I have to change it, even though it's still my same account each time, which is not something you can do with Teams. Everyone says they cannot see my picture. Okay, so I would say reach out to your IT administrator and say, my picture's not showing up. What the heck? You know, that's one of those things that an IT person should be able to do. All right, how to turn off the endless bubbles. Okay, so that, yeah, same question. Okay. If there are any other questions, I'll give you about 1 minute or so to post here, and I'll be happy to answer. And actually, I will just go back to the resources slide since people usually prefer that. Do that real quick. And again, you can get the download these slides. This is case sensitive, so if you do type this into your browser, make sure to capitalize the M and the P. All right. Well, looks like there's no more questions. So thank you all very, very much again. Have a great rest of the day. Make sure to hang around for that collab talk at the end. Christian does a really good job with the discussions and all that kind of stuff. And I hope this was useful for you. And feel free to reach out to me afterwards. Feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. I will accept anybody's request. And again, grab those slides and send them around internally. And hopefully you'll find some use for them. And maybe some improvement within your organization and some behavioral benefits out of it. So everybody have a great day, great Friday, and a great weekend.